Hi guys, my name is Sive and this is Stories in Sive, and today's video is a very special video. We are doing a tag today, and that is the mid-year book freakout tag. First half of the year is done, and I'd like to do a little bit of a recap in the form of this tag. I did the same thing last year and really enjoyed it, and basically just talk through some of my best books of the year, some of my worst books of the year. This is a pretty popular tag that goes around BookTube every June and July, and I'm ready to talk to you guys about some reads this year. So I actually want to start off talking about a few just general statistics. I'm going to walk you through my current story graph. So first off, my reading goal is 85. I've currently read 66 books so far this year. Looking at the mood pie chart here, it's basically a category that would describe the book. You can see the biggest pie is definitely emotional, mysterious, and dark, all on that right side, and then a lot of adventurous, tense books as well, and lighthearted books. All of that encompassing is like my thriller, horror, and then fantasy and sci-fi, which are easily the top genres that I read. Pace, you can see medium, that's pretty standard. I don't always agree with these qualifications because sometimes people will select a book as fast-paced if the book is short. So the pace of the actual writing or the plot or the character development might not even be fast, but because they read it fast, they make it a fast-paced book, and vice versa for really long books. Even if it's like the super thrilling, adventurous, high combat fantasy novel, if it took them a long time to read it, they're gonna put a slow pace. Next is page number. As you can see, the majority is between that 300 and 499 or 500 page range. I've read a lot more short books this year than I have in past years. And then the fiction to nonfiction, this is pretty average for me. I do read nonfiction, but very rarely, like once every other month. Out of the 66 books so far, I've read 6 nonfiction. Then getting into genres, you can see the top is romance and contemporary, which is kind of surprising to me. And then next is thriller and historical. Young adult, see, I have an issue with this. Young adult as a genre, that's not a genre, that's like a reading age. You can have mystery young adult, you can have romance YA, you can have all of the genres within a young adult context. So the few that are higher than normal in past years for me are here, the horror and science fiction. The next pie chart is format, and this is print versus audiobooks. I'm really excited because I have read a lot more books physically than I ever have. Normally, like, I'm an audiobook gal, but I've been reading like pretty much one then the other, one then the other. Then my most read authors, I don't have one that like really stands out. Alice Oseman and Evie Dunmore are 2 authors that I've read 3 books from, and then I've read from a lot of authors 2 books this year. The number of books and number of pages, kind of going through each of the months. As you can see, in April and May, I dipped down really low, and I'm kind of back up. I think we'll keep that, but I have also read 19,664 pages this year, which is really cool. And lastly, my average star rating. I haven't rated the last few books, and then I also sometimes don't rate nonfiction. So you see there's only 62 reviews here out of the 66 books. As you can see, I have a very good rating this year. I have rated so many books 5 stars. It has been overall an amazing year for me with reading, and I'm just so pleased about that. I have no 1-star ratings. So that's the quick overview that I wanted to go through, and now we can get into the questions. Starting with a very, very difficult one, and that is, what is your favorite book so far that you've read this year? Really starting out with a banger here. This is extremely difficult for me to answer, but I did pick one. I have an honorable mention, but I'd have to say that my favorite book that I've read so far this year is The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis, and this, if you don't know, is a book that I have been raving about this whole year. It's a multiple perspective sci-fi story, and we follow a number of different characters. It's political, there's a war going on. One of the characters that we follow is a warrior on one side of the war, and then on the other side of the war, we follow a second character who is a religious figure. This is one of the rare books that have captured me from the very first page, and I knew that I was going to like it. If you have any interest in sci-fi fantasy, multiple perspective. This is high fantasy. It is not YA. There's a lot of really tough subjects in here, and I very much love all of these characters. They are extremely well developed. This is a series, and so there's a second book out right now, and the third one is coming out this year, and so you do get to see some of that character development, and it's just amazing. And you hurt for these characters, and you want to hug them, you want to slap them. It's just great. Everybody is morally gray. There's very little like, this is the right thing to do. And I love that. I enjoyed this book so much, and I think it's the best book I've read so far this year. My honorable mention is a completely different genre, and that's why I kind of picked it, is because they're not even like comparable. And that is a thriller, Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. I'm so surprised that this is like one of my favorite books so far this year. Like, it was a 5-star and it was really, really good, but I was just reflecting on these questions and I was like, wow, my reading experience with this book, it was so suspenseful. My heart was actually racing, and I can't really think of another book that has done that for me. We follow our main character, Emma, who is a mother, and she has quite a large family, and she is coming up on her 40th birthday. This is significant for her because her mother, leading up to her 40th birthday, began to stop sleeping and ended up having a pretty significant psychotic breakdown on her 40th birthday. Now, Emma is leading up to her own 40th and is starting to have trouble falling asleep. This is a thriller that I would reread. Like, how many thrillers do you actually want to reread? Once you like know the twist and you know the thing, like, it kind of becomes a little bit like, oh yeah, this is great, one and done. But this has a different element to it. It is just so well crafted, and it made me obsessed with Sarah Pinborough in a way that I wasn't before. And if you are interested in thrillers and like to be freaked out, you should read this. The second question is, what is the favorite sequel that I've read so far this year? And I've actually read a lot of sequels this year, not companion novels, and I'm not talking about the first books in a series. I'm talking about in a series, 2, 3, 4, so on, and I've read 10 so far this year, and my favorite has got to be Starsight. Starsight by Brandon Sanderson blew me away. This is a young adult sci-fi series. This is the second book in the Skyward series by Mr. Brandon Sanderson himself. I love Spenza. She's our main character. She's a pilot, and she lives in a compound that is being protected. There begins to be a rebellion in which they potentially might not be protected but are actually being caged. So in the first book, it is all about like discovering stuff. It's about Spenza becoming the pilot. It is a lot of character development. It's keying you into the politics, how the government work. It was so good, very, very fast paced. It's hard to talk about series without spoilers, but I can say about this book, Brandon Sanderson just did something different. Like, he didn't just repeat the, oh my gosh, Civil War, or let's do a rebellion. Spenza is in a brand new setting. There is something brand new going on. She is doing like spy espionage stuff. And it is so interesting and fun and so cool. You get to learn about a bunch of different people groups. You get to learn about histories of those people groups and how it affects Spenza and her friends and her government. And it was just really interesting and brought something completely different to the table. And that's why this is my favorite sequel I've read so far this year. Okay, question number 3 is, what is a release that you are excited that has come out this year that you haven't got to? So that has got to be Blade Breaker, which is the sequel to Realm Breaker by Miss Victoria Aveyard. I read the Red Queen series and loved it, and I picked this book up in May and was not impressed. So why is Blade Breaker Scythe an anticipated release? Because it's Victoria Aveyard, and because this ended on a cliffhanger, of course. And though this is a 3-star read for me, I've mentioned this before on my channel, but it's not uncommon for me to give a 3-star rating to a series that ends up being pretty amazing for me, and I continuously just give the books higher and higher ratings as they go on. I'm a big fan of the last book of series. This follows many, many characters. It got pretty convoluted. Every character seemed pretty formulaic, pretty like this is a standard cartoonish character. So I'm not saying I would recommend this book, but I'm really excited about Blade Breaker. This had an insane, like, world is breaking, like monsters coming through a portal. It was like war and combat, and it was crazy, and I loved the plot. But the characters just fell super flat for me, and that's why I ended up giving it a 3 stars, because I had these really convicting opinions about the different, like, sections of the book, like the character versus the plot. But I just couldn't, like, not pick up this second book, and I haven't done that yet. So Blade Breaker is definitely a book that I want to get to this year. Question number 4 is your most anticipated release that has not come out yet this year, and that is Belladonna by Miss Adeline Grace. I loved the All the Stars and Teeth duology that she put out, and I'm really excited to pick up Belladonna, which is a different series by her. It's a completely new tone, apparently. It's new adult, I believe, and it's about a young woman, and there's a character is literally death, like death incarnate is a character, and it's a murder mystery. It's like a haunted house, and it's very like Regency, like ballroom gown, super dramatic. I'm excited for all the tropes. It's enemies to lovers, and yeah, I feel like I would eat that up, and I'm excited to support Adeline Grace. Question number 5 is your biggest disappointment so far this year, and I have 2 books that I want to talk about. So these 2 books disappointed me for very different reasons, and first off, I'm going to talk about The Merciless by Daniel Vega, and this is a like possession, like horror book, and it is young adult, and the reason why this disappointed me is because I didn't have the reaction that I thought I would to this. I just really did not enjoy this. Like, I want to be the girly who can like hang with that level of horror and that level of gore, but it just like didn't sit well with me. I did not enjoy this book at all. I have it in a pile over there. I'm gonna donate. It just left me feeling really icky, and I would not really recommend this book unless you can hang with body horror that is pretty high. It felt different because it wasn't necessarily scary. It was like the definition of unsettling. Like, I just felt like so weird reading this book, and I just didn't enjoy that feeling. And the thing is, there are so many books that I'm interested in that are like booktubers' favorites for feeling unsettled, and I didn't like the feeling. And that's what disappointed me, is because like I didn't have the reaction to this like style of writing and this type of story that I thought I would, and that's disappointing because it closes off a whole like section and subgenre of reading that I was excited to maybe get into one day. Maybe I'm just like not mature enough for it yet, or maybe it's just not my thing, and that's okay, but it's definitely a disappointment to me. And the next book disappointed me for a different reason, and that is Cross Her Heart by Sarah Pinborough. So how can the same author that was on my literal like favorite book of the year question also be on my biggest disappointment question? Who knows? It's Miss Sarah Pinborough. I mean, this book is pretty formulaic. It's a thriller. It's about a mom and about a daughter and like a weird relationship, and then the daughter is actually being groomed by a man online, and you hear from both of their perspective, the mom and the daughter, and then also there is a co-worker's perspective. Like, I think I have really high expectations for Sarah Pinborough, and so it was a big disappointment for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. It was very mediocre. It's pretty I actually read it pretty recently too, and so that one's like pretty fresh in my mind. It would be a good one that I'd recommend to someone who is getting into thrillers and like into a mystery. It was definitely mystery more than thriller in my opinion. There were no scenes that I was feeling the suspense, and there is only one scene that surprised me, and in a thriller, I'm looking to be surprised and be in suspense like the whole time. So yeah, Cross Her Heart was a disappointment. The next question is, what is a book that surprised you so far this year? And that has got to be The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna by Juliet Grams. This book surprised me because it's an ex-library book that I picked up because I saw it one time. So this is an example of, before I did my book buying ban the previous year, I did a lot of book buying and I didn't really know what I was buying or what I was getting into. And so I picked up the audiobook for this so that I could just get it off of my TBR, but I really had low expectations for this, and also it's a historical fiction. And if you know me, historical fiction and me don't always jive together. So this was easily the biggest surprise. It was amazing. I gave this book 5 stars. We follow a character throughout the span of her life and into the next generation that she brings into the world. And she is from Italy, and we start in Italy, and then her and her family emigrate over to New York, I believe, or Boston. I don't remember. But they emigrate over to America, and it's about her growing up in Italy and her family dynamics, her relationship with her mother and her sister. This book has a lot of war, there's immigration, there's a lot of grief and loss in this book, but this is so focused on character development and relational development that it still managed to have hope, even though my heart absolutely broke for Stella and the whole Fortuna family in what happens here. So I would recommend this book tentatively. This does have some pretty tough topics, so do look up your trigger warnings, but I'd recommend it to people who are interested in a multi-generational family saga with elements of grief and loss, but just that peak character development, because on the surface the story is pretty simple. However, the writing and the character development just set this book apart for me, and it was definitely the biggest surprise of the year. Question number 7 is your favorite author so far of the year, and I'm going to kind of morph this a little bit because a favorite author to me is I've read multiple books from them and I love pretty much almost everything they write. So for this is a new author to me, and that is Brandon Sanderson. I think that he could be my new favorite author, especially in this new year, bringing him into 2023 as well, because of the writing, the content. He is the king of sci-fi and fantasy. If you're on BookTube at all, you've heard of him. I feel if I were to like this series and get into some of the other series that he's written, as there are many, it could just open up so many doors for me, and I'm excited to explore more of his work. Question number 8 is the newest fictional crush, and I'm kind of like just giving this answer because the question is here, but I will say I don't really have a fictional crush that is sticking out to me a whole lot that I like think about, but for the sake of the question, I am going to pull the love interest from one of the only 2 books that I have given 5 stars that is a romance book that I've given 5 stars, and that is A Rogue of One's Own, Mr. Tristan Valentine, written by Evie Dudmore. This man is exceptional. It's a historical romance, and he is the love interest of a women's suffragist, and as she is fighting for the right to vote in London, he is just one of the most amazing and supportive and loving, secure, confident man. He does not need affirmation from external people. He's very well realized as a character, and his just support and love for the main character made me like love him. Also, he doesn't just talk the talk, he definitely acts like it. He supports her in many ways, even though that is not what society and his peers around him expect from him. And the reason why this book actually got a 5-star is because of a choice and an action that he takes at the end of the book. If you're looking for a good historical fiction, I can recommend this one. Question number 9 is your newest favorite character, and I would have to say Zhu Chongba from She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. They are just an amazing character. Zhu is put through so much in this book. I'm so nervous about the second one, but I'm really excited to pick it up because of this character. Zhu is extremely resilient. It chronicles her rise in power, basically, from a peasant girl in a village to a monk to a soldier, and then to a leader, and then almost like a political or religious leader. It's just like this whole big trajectory that's gone on, and it's because of fate. It was very like, how much of it is what was destined to happen and how much of it is Zhu just being amazing and being Zhu. And I really liked that conversation because I think Zhu as a character had to kind of come to the terms with like, yeah, fate does hold over my life, but it is also up to me to decide what I want to do with myself. I get to choose how I act and how I react. This character just broke my heart. So yeah, I'll have to say Zhu Chongba for this question. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry. There are a number of books that have made me cry so far this year, but I'm going to say a book that isn't an obvious one, like The River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty. I cried at Beach Read by Emily Henry. Yeah, I read this. This is the other 5-star romance read that I've read this year. Yeah, I cried. This book follows our main character, January, and she is down on her luck financially, romantically, and familially, and basically just decides that she is going to go and stay in a house that used to belong to her dad, who has just passed away, and write her book. She's an author, she's a romance author, and upon arriving, she discovers that her neighbor is in fact her college rival, and he is also struggling from writer's block, and they end up connecting. Romance ensues. This book wasn't just like a surface level romance. It wasn't just like ooey gooey. There was a lot of really tough stuff that was explored here. January processing things, needing a routine, and being able to rely and depend upon someone like her love interest was just so beautiful. I cried at the end. There's some reconciliation that happens. There's maybe not perfect healing, and nothing is like completely fine, but it was just like the very human way of taking a step towards healing can be a huge victory, and I loved the way that this was written. I loved the way January was written, and yeah, it made me cry. Question number 11 is a book that made you happy, and that is Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-Hae Kim. And my mom has my copy of this book because she has to read it. Mom, if you're watching this, I hope you're reading it. This follows a number of characters from the ages of about 13 all the way into their 60s and 70s throughout the Korean independence movement. One of the characters we follow is a courtesan, one is a warrior and soldier slash street rat guy turned warrior, and then there's a politician, and then there's the girl's aunt, and so it's like this big web. And I enjoyed this book so much. The ending of it made me grin. I was so happy for these characters. This is a good example of characters that I actively think about quite often, actually. And if you are looking for a book that is just going to make you very happy, I wouldn't say that this is like very lighthearted, but the ending made me happy. You know what I mean? Like, it put me through hell, and like maybe that's why I felt happy, is because it brought me down so low, and when like the ending was like everyone is mediocrely okay, I was like, oh, I feel happy. So I don't know, maybe it's like relative happiness, if that makes sense. But I get to answer the way I want to answer, but just as a disclaimer, this isn't a happy book. It just made me happy. Ooh, okay. So the second to last question is pretty interesting, and that is, what is the most beautiful book that you have received so far this year? This is bought or received. So I just kind of went through my TBR cart, and I really don't know the answer to this question. There's a trend in book covers that I really enjoy, and I got a book with that trend on the cover, but I've also got this other book that is just like, the color and the composition is really interesting to me, and I don't know which one to choose, so I'm going to show you both. Let me talk to you first about this book trend, and that is essentially people on book covers that are centered and symmetrical in the middle. I just absolutely love the way these look. I think they are so cool. I think they're really dynamic, very in your face, like big statement. Here is a character incarnate, and then you basically get to read about that character. So that is a book trend I love. Combined with one of my favorite colors at the moment, I would have to give the prettiest book I bought this year to The Second Rebel. I know I've talked about this series a lot, but it just has the character in the middle. I know who this is. I know who the character is, and I can picture it now because of this. His hair, his proportions, and yes, he's a blue man. He's not blue in the book, but I just love it, and I love the matte on the shiny. I love that it's got some dimension to it. And I also love the detailing on the corners. It's ribbed. It's beautiful. I wouldn't say that I love the spine. It's just black, and that's the back. No special end pages or book plate or anything like that, but I think I'd have to give the most beautiful book to The Second Rebel. I am going to mention that second book, though, and that is honorable mention Bunny by Mona Awad. This is just so simple. It's so eye-catching. This pink is just beautiful. The pink on the black with the yellow writing. I just love it. I think it's so pretty. I'm so excited to see it on my shelves. It's got this bright yellow spine. And I think it's the simplicity that is really surprising to me, that I would like find both of these in my favorites because this is so detailed. It has a lot of depth and a lot of dimension. And then this is just so simple, but I think because it's simple, I'm like, what is that book about? Bunny? Are you kidding? And the last question is, what are books that you need to read before the end of the year? And that's a lot. The answer is a lot. I'm really trying to prioritize fantasy and sci-fi as I round out the year. I want to get caught up in the Skyward series. Cytonic is the third, and then there's a collection of 3 novellas that go in between these. I want to read 1984 by George Orwell. I want to read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I have not gotten to Gideon the Ninth yet, and I want to do that this year before the end. I want to read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I want to read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara. Like, I could go on, and I'm not going to walk you through my whole physical TBR. That could probably be a whole nother video. But yes, I do have some work to do. So my friends, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me for this tag and chatting with me about my best books of the year and the worst books. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would love to know what is your favorite book that you've read so far this year, and what is a book that disappointed you. Answer the best worst question for me down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you like other bookish content like this, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you, and other than that, have a great rest of your day. I will see you in the next video. Bye!